go over the branches that we need to know for this class. Um, so first, the most important thing to know is that there are 12 pairs of cranial nerves that we're going to be talking about. Um, they all pass through the skull by a foramina or fissures, and they can either be motor, sensory, or both. So the first nerve is the olfactory nerve. This one is a sensory nerve. It transmits odor impulses from the nasal mucosa to the brain. A way that I personally remember it is ol and olfactory, and I think of old people stink and stink as an odor. No offense to old people, it's just the way that I remember it. This one is the most different. It enters the skull through the cribriform plate of the ethmoid bone, and a lot of the other ones go through foramens or fissures, but this one goes through the cribriform plate. Next, we have the optic nerve. The way that I remember it is that we have two eyes, so cranial nerve 2 is optic nerve. Optic, I immediately think of the eye. This is also a sensory nerve. It carries visual impulses from the eye to the brain, and this one enters through the optic canal of the sphenoid bone. So optic nerve, optic canal. Next, we have cranial nerve 3, which is the oculomotor nerve. And as you can see in the name itself, it has the word motor. So automatically, I would know that this is a motor nerve. This is responsible for the contraction of most eye muscles, eyelid and eyeball movement, and pupillary constriction. This one exits through the superior orbital fissure of the sphenoid bone. Next, we have cranial nerve number 4, the trochlear nerve. This is also a motor nerve. It turns the eye down and laterally, and it exits through the superior orbital fissure of the sphenoid bone as well. Next, we have cranial nerve number 5, which is the trigeminal nerve. This is the largest cranial nerve. It has both sensory and motor functions. There are 3 branches that we're going to talk about in another PowerPoint that we have to know about. The trigeminal nerve is main function is touch and pain. And again, 3, so we know that this has 3 branches. So first, we have the mandibular division. This is important for the muscles of mastication and chewing. The way that I remember it is that when you try to chew a jawbreaker, it can cause pain. So again, chewing is the motor function, pain is the sensory function of the trigeminal nerve. The 3 branches of the trigeminal nerve, which we will eventually go over, is the ophthalmic nerve, which is V1. This exits through the superior orbital fissure. The maxillary nerve, which is V2, which exits through the foramen rotundum. And the mandibular nerve, which is V3, which exits through the foramen ovale. Cranial nerve 6 is abducens. This is the motor nerve for the lateral rectus. It moves the eyeball laterally, and it exits the skull through the superior orbital fissure. And in case you were wondering, abduction means the movement away from the midline. So this would move the eyeball laterally. Cranial nerve number 7 is the facial nerve. This carries both sensory and motor nerves as well. It has to do with facial expressions, as it says in the name. It is the secretion of tears and saliva, and it also aids the taste of the body of the tongue. And the sensory function is the skin behind the ear. Cranial nerve number 8 is the vestibulocochlear nerve. The way that I personally remember this, because I would always mess it up, is that the number 8 kind of looks like an ear, if you think about it. I don't know if that's helpful, but it's helped me and my friends. The vestibulocochlear nerve is a sensory nerve for the inner ear. It carries sensory fibers for hearing and balance from the semicircular canals. And again, cochlear, that's in the ear, so immediately think of ear. And it enters the brain through the internal acoustic meatus of the temporal bone, and the internal acoustic meatus is also a part of the ear. Cranial nerve number 9, the glossopharyngeal nerve. This carries sensory fibers from the base of the tongue, tonsils, and the pharynx. Again, if you see pharyngeal, immediately think of tongue. This one provides taste sensation from the base, and it is a motor innervation to the stylopharyngeus muscle, and it controls swallowing. Cranial nerve number 10, this is the vagus nerve. This is the longest cranial nerve. It carries both motor and sensory components. The motor component supplies to the muscles of the soft palate, the pharynx, and the larynx. One of the most important things about this nerve is that it stimulates the digestive system and it senses the aortic blood pressure. It also slows down the heart rate, and the sensory component is the skin around the ear and the taste sensation. Cranial nerve number 11 is the accessory nerve or the spinal accessory nerve. This is a motor nerve and it is connected to the trapezius or the sternocleidomastoid muscle, and it has the muscles of the soft palate and the pharynx, and this also controls swallowing movements. Cranial nerve number 12 is the hypoglossal nerve. It controls the muscles of the tongue, and it's also motor. So in order to break it up to make it a little bit more easier, the ones that deal with eye movement is oculomotor, trochlear, and abducens. Taste information is with facial, glossopharyngeal, and vagus. Blood pressure is glossopharyngeal and vagus. And a mnemonic to help you remember what nerve is first or second or 12th is once one takes the anatomy final, very good vacations are heavenly. And this can help you remember it in order. And then another mnemonic to help you figure out if it's sensory, motor, or both is some say marry money, but my big brother says big boobs matter more. And if you have a problem with the word boobs, you can also say big brains matter more. So now I'm going to go ahead through some questions. You guys can pause in between to answer. The answers will come right after the questions. So how many pairs of the nerves are there? There are 12 pairs of the nerves. What is cranial nerve number 1? Is it sensory or motor? Cranial nerve number 1 is the olfactory nerve, and it is a sensory. What is cranial nerve number 2? And is it sensory or motor? Cranial nerve number 2 is the optic nerve, and it is also sensory. What is cranial nerve number 3? And is it sensory or motor? Cranial nerve number 3 is the oculomotor nerve, and it is motor. What is cranial nerve number 4? Is this motor or sensory? Cranial nerve number 4 is the trochlear nerve, and it is motor. What is cranial nerve number 5? Is that sensory or motor? Cranial nerve number 5 is the trigeminal nerve, and it is both. What is cranial nerve number 6, and is that sensory or motor? Cranial nerve number 6 is the abducens nerve, and it is motor. What is cranial nerve number 7? Is that sensory or motor? Cranial nerve number 7 is the facial nerve, and it has both. What is cranial nerve number 8, and is that sensory or motor? Cranial nerve number 8 is the vestibulocochlear nerve, and it is sensory. What is cranial nerve number 9, and is that sensory or motor? Cranial nerve number 9 is the glossopharyngeal nerve, and it is both. What is cranial nerve number 10, and is that sensory or motor? Cranial nerve number 10 is the vagus nerve, and it has both. What is cranial nerve number 11, and is that sensory or motor? Cranial nerve number 11 is the accessory nerve, and it is motor. And finally, what is cranial nerve number 12, and is that sensory or motor? Cranial nerve number 12 is the hypoglossal nerve, and it is motor. Which nerves deal with eye movement? There are 3 of them. The 3 nerves that deal with eye movement is oculomotor, trochlear, and abducens. Which nerves deal with taste information? And there are 3. The nerves that deal with taste information is facial, glossopharyngeal, and vagus. Which nerves deal with blood pressure sensory information? And there are 2 of these. The nerves that deal with blood pressure information is the glossopharyngeal and vagus.